I'm now going to give you a very basic introduction to how to record a macro to save yourself a lot of time if you need to automate a set of steps. Now, this is by no means the be all and end all of everything you can do with a macro. This is to just give you a flavor for what it does, because macros form the start point for a much larger area of Excel, which is called Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. So let's talk about, before I do the macro and show you how to record it, let's talk about the context of why I might want to record a macro. So for instance, this file might be something that I get given to me every single day by a customer or a supplier, or maybe someone in the business. And every time I get it, I maybe manipulate it in exactly the same way. So every time I get this file, I always get rid of the top two rows. Perhaps I'm always wanting to get rid of everything apart from the name and the earnings. And perhaps I do a little bit of formatting on the heading to make it look how I want it to be. Every single time I get that file, that's what I want to do to it. So I always do that manipulation. Now, if you have something like this in your job whereby, shall we say, you feel a little bit like a robot each time you do it, well, that means it's usually fairly ripe for recording a macro. Now, first of all, what a macro does. A macro watches you perform a set of steps, and then when you want to do those steps again, rather than you having to manually do them, you can then click on the macro and it will go and do those steps for you. So how we record a macro is we go to View at the top, we pop the arrow down just here, and we go and choose Record Macro. So I'm going to call this macro something fairly meaningful. So I'm going to call it format staff _list, and let's put improve in there. Now note, can you see I didn't put any spaces in? I either capitalized the first list of each word, the first letter of each word, or I used underscores. Macros do not like to have spaces in them when you come to name them. Now, just for simplicity, I'm going to choose the personal macro workbook to record my macro to. Reason why I'm using this is it's nice and easy for us to recall that macro, because when you record a macro into the personal macro workbook, it means it's available to every single Excel file you open on your computer. So this is by far and away the easiest way to get used to using macros. So all I then do after that is click OK. So if that was the start of recording a macro, so we went to record it, and you can tell it's recording by, if I pop the arrow down, can you see it now says stop recording? What I'm showing you next is the middle of a macro. So the middle of recording a macro is you're going to go and do your steps. So I'm going to delete these two lines. I'm also going to remove these bits of information here because I don't need them. And I'm going to do a little bit of formatting at the top. So I'm going to go along and do my color code in there. And then that's the middle. So let's say that's me finish my steps. The very definite end is to go to View, pop the arrow down and click Stop Recording. Now, this is a bit of an odd one because I'm going to now close this file down and not save changes because I want it to revert back to what it was before. And then I'm going to reopen it and I'm going to run the macro. But when I close Excel down, it's going to ask me, do I want to save changes to the file? But it's also going to ask me, do I want to save changes to something called the personal macro workbook, which is where the macro has been recorded. So I'm just going to close down Excel, and I'm going to close down everything in Excel, because unless you close everything in Excel, it won't trigger the need for Excel to save this personal macro workbook. So I'm not going to save the file simple list, which is where I've done my, I've recorded my macro on. So I'm going to click don't save to that. And it's also, can you see, asking me, do I want to save changes to the personal macro workbook? I must hit save to this because this is Excel saving the macro that I've just recorded. Now I'm going to go and open this file again, the one that I've just, performed this macro on, actually recorded it, because this is an example of the file coming back to me, and perhaps I'm going to need to do those steps again. So rather than having to do it manually, I can now go to View and click Macro. Now these are all old macros I've recorded on previous courses, but if I now come along and find the one I recorded earlier on in the example, can you see Format Staff List Improve? Now once I'm ready, all I now do is click Run, and what it's going to do, you don't see it because it's pretty quick, but it goes through all of those steps that I performed when I recorded the macro, but it does it automatically for me. So again, rather than me having to do those steps every single time I need to do this report, I can just effectively click a button. So that is a bit about how to record a macro to automate a set of steps within an Excel file.